Welcome to Module 2 of Leadership. Now, we're just going to go briefly some things that we have already discussed before and said before of what leadership is, right? Now, leaders have a distinct responsibility to those they lead and the organization they represent. The concept of leadership is the method a leader chooses to intentionally guide others in an organization to achieve organizational goals. Now, once again, successful leaders intentionally seek out and discover their team's characteristics that will help the organization accomplish organizational goals. Now, the reason we're going over this is because we want that to be the forefront of our thought here. This is the object of a leader, helping their team accomplish the organizational goals. That's what the object is of leadership. Now, once again, we're going to go over certain leadership styles. In Module 1, we went over servant and shepherd leadership. In this module, Module 2, we'll go over ethical and moral leadership. And then in Module 3, we'll cover toxic and humane dignity leadership. I want to thank you so much for coming out here and being part of this. Now, before we go on, let's just center ourselves for a moment and let's get still in the presence of God and let's just have some quiet reflection. Let us pray. Lord, we thank you for the opportunity to come to you and learn more about leadership. We ask that you use this time, this opportunity to grow us, to challenge us, help us to see ourselves in areas that we have opportunities to improve, in areas that are strengths. And Lord, help us also to pinpoint people who could help us develop as leaders. In your name we pray. Amen. All right. Now, here's some tidbits about ethical leadership and moral leadership. So, when we're talking about ethical leadership, we're talking about being inspirational. Getting people inspired to do great things, building that kind of fire within them, that passion. We're talking about accountability. Not in the sense of I'm going to hold my team accountable, not just in that sense, but also in the sense of I'm going to have some introspection on myself and hold myself accountable and welcome my team and my peers and my colleagues to hold me accountable. We're going to talk about transparency. In other words, I want people to see I am who I say I am. So this is more of an intrinsic kind of qualities we're talking about here. We're talking about ethical leadership as well as moral leadership. We're going to dive into diversity, equity, and inclusion. In other words, we're going to look at the makeup of teams. Am I a leader who's looking at the makeup of my team? Does it reflect the community that which we serve? Does it reflect the world which is around us? We're going to look at equity. Are we putting people in positions of authority and leadership? Am I trying to promote that in order to get help that is needed for our teams? Am I looking at inclusion? And am I understanding that everyone is valued and everyone needs to be celebrated, regardless of what culture you come from? Am I thinking about champion values? Am I a champion for the values that I'm promoting from our organization and my own values? Who am I the champion for? And we're also talking about being mission driven. Are we pursuing the mission? How are we getting people to pursue the mission and keeping it at the forefront? All right. Now, when we want to define ethical leadership is the practice of inspiring others to achieve organizational goals while maintaining good ethical direction and encouraging others to do the same through welcomed accountability. Right? So what we're talking about here is we're making sure we're doing the right thing 100% of the time on purpose, right? Now we're going to make mistakes, we're going to have accidents, things are going to be said that shouldn't be said. Those things happen all the time, but that is more of an accident. We don't want to intentionally cause harm or intentionally do something that we know is wrong. Right? So we're trying to maintain that good ethical direction. We're trying to make sure that we're doing abiding by our policies and procedures that promote good ethical standards. And this means welcome accountability. This means transparency. Now we're looking at moral leadership. Moral leadership is desire and ability to help others thrive without regard to their gender, race, sexual orientation, or of social economic status. In other words, I'm going to make sure that you feel comfortable with being who you are in this environment that we're in. It doesn't mean that we have to agree with everyone. Doesn't mean we have to look alike, talk alike, sound alike, act alike. But it does mean I need to make sure you have a comfortable space within this organization, and that you feel comfortable with talking about yourself, with whether it's with your cultural dress, whether it's with your personality, whatever your culture may bring. We want to embrace that as a whole, because essentially what we're saying is a good moral leader embraces people as they are, and they help people to thrive, to be themselves in a positive way. Now, what I mean by that also is we're not talking about being mean and crude to people. That's not the kind of things we're talking about. People being themselves. We're talking about being yourself in a productive way for the betterment of the organization and the betterment of yourself. So let's look at ethical leadership first. Let's dive into that. Now, what I want you to do is take the time right now just to look at this quote. I want you to take the time to reflect on it and write about what's the first couple things that comes to mind. Now, what I would like for you to do is to pause this presentation at this moment, reflect on the quote, write about it, and then we'll come back to it. All right. Thank you for coming back, and thank you for pressing pause on that as well. So look at this quote once again. A leader who relies on authority to solve problems is bound to come to grief. And so what this is essentially saying, if you're looking at your position and your ability and to enforce your will over someone's will and having the right to do that because of your position, and that's how you solve problems, you're not really solving problems. You're creating more grief for yourself later on, because you're creating an environment where people know they can't rely or trust on you. That you're creating an environment where people think that you know everything and they know nothing based on how you presenting it to them. And so this is really important as a good ethical leader, especially that you need to be a leader who's able to resolve problems because you're leading in the right direction, because you're willing to take accountability, you're willing to receive feedback and give feedback as well. So now let's look at integrity and accountability when it comes to ethical leadership. So first, let's go with integrity. So ethical leaders possess the integrity to provide their team with the resources and organizational tools to develop their skill set for the productive use of the organization. Now, here's the key thing. They have the integrity to provide their team with the resources and organizational tools. Now, remember, in shepherd leadership, it was you provide these things, right? But when we talk about ethical leadership, we're actually talking about that piece that says, I know it is right and good to give my team help and to provide the resources and the organizational tools they need to develop their skill set. Essentially, not only is it's not just being productive for the organization, it's also so they can aspire to be leaders in the future, right? Ethical leaders, it's still got that kind of shepherd leadership feel, is because you're still mentoring, you're still developing people. So an ethical leader knows that I need to assess the proper tools and resources that my team needs so they can develop their skill set. Let's give you an example. So if I see someone has an issue or an opportunity for someone to grow in how they address and talk to people, I'm going to help develop that skill set by I'm going to send them to trainings of how to communicate. And I'm not going to use this in a demeaning way, but I'm going to use it to encourage them to grow and to develop that skill set of how to talk to people. And I'm going to look for the organizational tools within my organization, or those, whether it's a training, whether it's looking at something on the outside organization, whether it's an educational class, whether it's a conversation we have. I'm going to make sure to provide those things because that's what I would want someone to do for me. Right? Ethical leaders, they follow the golden rule: do unto others as you have them do unto you. So an ethical leader is going to ensure that the tool sets are there and the resources are there because it is the right thing to do. Ethical leaders also possess the integrity to help their team members develop the autonomy to voice their opinions, exercise their judgment, and properly use the skill set for organizational benefit. So this is kind of like the second step in this. Not only am I going to look for resources and organizational tools to develop these skill sets, I'm going to help them live this out, right? It's not enough to send someone to a training or help them get some education to develop the knowledge of a skill set. You have to take it the next step and allow them to start to voice their opinions, right? If they're going to some kind of training or class, if they have some kind of expertise, then I want to look at them as subject matter experts and get their opinions. I want to get their feedback. That means I'm going to be open to conversation. I'm going to be open to some pushback. If I say no on a certain thing, I'm open to pushback because I know my leaders have the autonomy to speak in a manner that is respectful, honorable, but also voice a valued opinion. So this is about developing that individual, right? And then we look at exercising that judgment, right? If they have the education, the training, and the skill set, then let them exercise their judgment. Let them be free. If we all if we all don't care about who gets the glory, but work together, we can get a lot of things done, right? That's the kind of mentality. Please exercise your judgment. And the leaders, listen, leaders, your associates will know with the accountability piece that we'll talk about next. They'll know that they will be held accountable for their choices and their decisions to exercise their judgment. But if you develop them as human beings, if you develop them and their skill set, they're going to make some good judgment calls because you're showing them and you're teaching them and you're training them to properly use their skill set, not just develop it, not just know it, not just have it, but to properly develop it. Now, the last part of integrity, ethical leaders share needed information with their team as well as take planned action steps that increase team morale and productivity. So what we're talking about here is ethical leaders, they share the information that their associates need to know in order to make the right decision. What we mean by that is they're not just willy-nilly saying anything. They're sharing good, needed information. They're not ethical leaders are not gossiping about what's happening, how this KPI came down from the executive team. They're not gossiping about the other team across the hall from them. They're not mocking people. They're not giving their team useless information. They're giving them the needed information to make a properly informed decision to accomplish the task at hand. Listen, the more information that we can get, the better decision that we can make. And then we can make proper planned action steps because now we have the information. And the reason we can make these planned action steps is because we've given them the resources, we've given them the organizational tools, we have given them the autonomy to speak and give us pushback. We know that they can exercise their judgment and properly use their skill set. So now when it comes to decisions and things we need to talk about, my team feels trusted. I trust my team to make these decisions and carry out these actions. Thus, I'm increasing staff morale and productivity as well because now I'm not spending 90% of my time dealing with unwanted behaviors from my team, but now I'm spending at least 90 or 85 to 90% of my time actually planning and preparing and making my team better and growing as individuals because they're doing the job that we hired them for. Now let's talk about the accountability piece in ethical leadership, right? Ethical leaders understand team comparison is done with the objective of inspiring teams to accomplish key performance indicators, but to compare without this in mind can ruin morale. Now, this is really, really important, right? If we're going to compare teams, we're not doing it vindictively. Competition is good, right? Friendly competition makes things a little more interesting. It gets people a little more involved, right? If your KPI is 75%, and someone else's KPI is 80%, you want to get to your 75, but you really want to get to 80 because you see the other 80 over there, right? Competition makes us work harder. It inspires us. It encourages us. It causes joy for us to celebrate. But if done wrong, it can also cause great grief amongst your team. Now, performance reviews are not all knowing or are telling of a person as an individual, excuse me, but offer insight to their work performance. So in other words, what we're saying is a performance review isn't a personal critique. Performance review isn't your opportunity and time to tell someone how bad they are as a human being. A review is a chance for you to have a compassionate conversation on someone's work performance only, right? You're talking about the work performance only. You're holding them accountable so they can have a good work performance in the end. Remember, it's not a personal attack. It's a professional critique. Ethical leaders make a priority ad, to provide advice that does not cause undue harm to their team and organization, right? Essentially, the when we're giving advice as leaders, we're not trying to make our associates feel bad. We're not trying to set our associates up for failure. We are essentially trying to help our associates succeed and do well and overcome any obstacles that may be in their way. We're trying to give them advice that is going to be career changing for the betterment of themselves and the organization. Ethical leaders understand that policies, cultures, and regulations should give way to ethics and be fashioned with ethics in mind. What we mean by this, we need to make sure as leaders that we're looking at our policies that it could be a hindrance to our associates in doing their job. Typically when we make all decisions coming from the top down, never having the solidarity come from the bottom up, we're going to make decisions that we think are good, that are the best, are better than any decision we've ever made, and it's going to be productive for us. But if we don't get insight from other people, if we don't get insight from our team members, we're going to make policies that can hinder a workflow. We're going to make policies without understanding culture. We're going to put in regulations that really put people in a difficult position because of their background, right? And so we really want to make sure that policies that we have out there, it is okay to review them. It's okay to try to see if these things are still culturally appropriate. Are they still, are we having policies that we've had since the 1960s, since the 1980s? Do we need to review these policies and consider doing something different? All right. Now, here's your ethical leadership scenario. Now, you're going to press pause on this presentation. I want you to read over each scenario of Tamika, Miriam, Curran, Aisha, David, and Jeffrey. Please read over each scenario, and then after that, unpause the presentation and you'll see the outcome. Now, I want you to think, though, just write down really quickly in brief notes what you would do in this situation, or what do you think should happen in this situation. All right. Hey, thank you for pressing pause. I appreciate that personal accountability that you're doing. Let's go to the next slide. Let's see. All right. So I'm glad you took the time to look through those. Now let's look at, some solutions. Okay, so let's take Tamika, for instance. So as a leader, she should take the time to actually read over Sigma 6, Lean Sigma 6, and learn it, right? And then communicate to her staff how this is a viable resource. Remember, Lean Sigma 6 is extraordinarily helpful. Most people do Lean Sigma 6 and they don't realize it, that they're doing Lean Sigma 6. So Tamika needs to take the time out actually to learn it and to help her team to understand it. Remember, you got to provide the organizational tools, right? For Miriam, as a leader, it's important for her to express her ideas and challenge others because the objective is to help the organization achieve its goals. Remember, it's okay to say, I'm going to push back on that for a second, and I would say this, right? It's okay to challenge someone else's thoughts or opinions on a subject because we're not trying to get a good answer to a problem. We're not trying to get the best answer we're trying to get the best answer, excuse me. We're trying to get the best answer to the problem, not just the one that is okay, good, better. We're trying to get the best possible answer. And the only way we can do that is if we work together and are willing to challenge one another. When it comes to Curran, as a leader, he needs to develop self-efficacy to know that he is essential and valued. His team is as well. Now, this can be best expressed by sharing vital information with his team to boost morale and productivity, right? As a leader, listen, you have to know already you're valuable. Whether you're a supervisor, manager, director, whatever you may be, you're in that position already because someone said you have the skills needed or can develop the skill sets needed to do this job and do it well. So you have to know that you're valuable and not trying to hoard information for yourself so you can feel more worthy. In other words, it's like a leader who wants to do all the extra tasks as opposed to reaching out to her associates, his or her associates for help. We have to be willing to provide information and give out that information so we can do a good job. For Aisha, it would be more effective if she uses performance reviews to look for opportunities to increase her team's individual skill set and use comparisons as opportunity for a healthy competition. In other words, it's okay when we're doing performance reviews. We don't want to make people feel like that we're rating them to the point of all the people who rate low are not going to do anything. We don't want to dehumanize people. We want to see performance reviews as an opportunity to have a good, cordial, and productive conversation for the betterment. Right? When we look at David here, as a leader, he should run with the intent to look for ways to engage his team and help remove barriers that hinder their productivity. Right? That's what leaders do. We're trying to make sure that there's nothing hindering your productivity as an associate. We want to make sure that they're doing well and we're doing our parts and help them do their job well. And when it comes to Jeffrey, he should review the policies yearly to ensure they are up to date and ethically sound. It is okay to go back over a policy, and if it's outdated, if it doesn't work, then we need to change it. If it is oppressive in nature, then we need to do something different. But we need to have that ethical mindset in order to do that. Now we're going to get into moral leadership. We're going to really do a deep dive in this one. I'm so excited. Let's get into it. Now, once again, I want you to take the moment to think about this quote. So please, at this point, pause the presentation, think about this point, or quote, excuse me, write it down, and let's get back to it. All right. Thank you so much for doing that. I appreciate your integrity and pressing pause and not just going through. Now, listen, it is an act of justice to help the poor. I mean, just think about that thought, right? It's an act of justice to go out there and help someone who is at a disadvantage for whatever reason. No matter how they got in that circumstance, it's an act that is just and merciful to go and help those who are in need. All right. Well, let's get into moral leadership when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, RDEI. So let's look at this first one. Moral leaders understand that not all their team has had the same advantages in their career. Therefore, they work on an individual career development track for each of their team members. So let's think about this, right? So it's a tough thing to admit, but in society as a whole, barriers have been placed in people in certain people groups way for a long time. So whether it's a barrier placed there because someone doesn't like your religion, someone doesn't like your ethnicity, someone doesn't like your race, someone doesn't like your gender, someone doesn't like your sexual orientation, whatever it may be, it has happened before in our history. And some, unfortunately, it still happens in some other places where individuals intentionally place barriers in front of people for career development because they don't like them. Whatever prejudice or bias it may be, they place in there intentionally. So we as moral leaders have to be able to remove those kind of barriers, whether we agree with the person or not, whether it's a different political view, whether it's a different religious view, no matter what it may be, we must be able to remove those barriers ourselves and say, I want to help you develop. I want to see where your weaknesses are, and I want to see opportunities that we can take advantage of. Remember, resources and organizational tools to develop your skill set. So this means sitting down, engaging with your employee, ask them about their life, ask them about their story, how they came, what kind of education do they want to pursue, um, and can our organization help pay for the education, right? So in other words, we're trying to make we're essentially saying representation matters and you matter to us. Now, moral leaders also create space for the employees to express their individuality without fear of ridicule or embarrassment, right? Sometimes we force people to fit in our perfect box, how we want things, how we view things. We want people to fit in our box so we can feel comfortable about what's happening and what they're doing. And listen, friends, that's just not okay. That's not the way it should be. People should not be forced to feel comfortable around us. And what I mean by that, people shouldn't be placed in a situation. People shouldn't be placed in a box in which they have to deny themselves so we can feel better about ourselves. They shouldn't have to be made so uncomfortable because we want to feel comfortable. So if that means whether it's a certain uh, headdress, whether it means it's a certain, it could be a dashiki, whatever it may be. We want to make sure that we're honoring the people who are working alongside of us day in and day out, honor our associates, and that they feel that they can embrace themselves and be themselves freely without ridicule or being objected. Moral leaders also have the responsibility to educate themselves on diversity, equity, and inclusion to help create policies that are DEI sensitive, excuse me. What we mean by this, moral leaders have an obligation to make sure that policies are in place that promote diversity, equity, and inclusion because representation matters, friends. It's very important that people feel that they can be themselves and others can see themselves in other people. Right. So to express this a little bit better, back in 2008, I remember seeing President Barack Obama being elected into office. I remember the inauguration. I remember all those things. And I remember feeling inspired to run for a political leadership position. I didn't know what it would be at some point, but I knew I wanted to do it. But seeing someone else do it in front of me gave me the courage to try and attempt. And guess what? I did. I was elected mayor in 2019 of Esterville, Iowa. But because I saw someone that looked like me in a position of leadership, I knew it was possible and I was inspired to do it. And so this is why it's so important for moral leaders to educate themselves on diversity, equity, and inclusion, to educate themselves on history and how certain people groups have experienced objectivity, have certain genders have experienced being ridiculed and mocked. Certain unfortunately, racial groups have experienced oppression and systematic racism. We, as leaders, we need to be aware of that, and we need to be sensitive enough to make sure that people are getting the help that they need, and we have policies in place that honor the diversity, equity, and inclusion which we represent, right? And when we mean diversity, we mean the people that we hire. It's a diverse group of everyone working within the building. Equity, we mean that in a sense of power structure. It's not everyone who's in seats of authority and power. They all don't look alike, talk alike, sound alike, think alike. We're going to see diversity in within that power group or that leadership group or that executive group. We're going to see diversity through and through. And inclusion, we mean essentially we're going to celebrate you. We're going to celebrate different cultures. We're going to celebrate different days. We're going to look at the meaning of these days. We're not going to celebrate them haphazardly. We're actually going to understand it. We're going to be authentic, whether it's in the food that we make, whether it's in the paintings we hang in the building. We want to be authentic. And leaders also, for more leaders, they also promote the values, right? They promote the organizational values to keep their team grounded and focused on the overall mission or the organization, but are unwilling to compromise the moral integrity for the sake of the organization. What we mean by this is, as a leader, you have standards, morals, and ethics already built inside of you. We're not asking you to change your morals, your standards, your ethics, and your values. We're asking you to promote the values of the organization while you're in the building. We're not trying to change you, and we're not trying to make you compromise your religious beliefs, your culture, your cultural ways. We're not trying to make that compromise, because then you begin to lack integrity, because then you're not who you say you're going to be. And as leaders, we can allow that. We don't want people to compromise, but we do want the promotion of the values of the organization when you come to work for us, right? Because you're serving alongside with us, and we want you to believe in the mission and the vision, and those values keep us rooted. Now, moral leaders willingly have high stake conversations that address behaviors that are inconsistent with the values of the organization. In other words, moral leaders are okay with having difficult conversations. They're okay with being a courageous leader and having that awkward 5 minute conversation to deal with a problem, to deal with associates who may have crossed the line they shouldn't have. We're willing to do that because the values, the mission, and the vision of organization are paramount to who we are as an organization, and we want those promoted. So when we see those of those of us who may step out of line of those values, we want to gently bring them back in so we can get this together. But that means you have to have these conversations that are tough, conversations that are uncomfortable. You have to be willing to put yourself out there and handle it in the proper organizational way. Moral leaders are forward thinkers who consider the impact of their actions to determine the best course of action overall. Right? In other words, a moral leader is truly considering, how can I do this action in a way that won't impact us in a negative way in the future. In other words, a moral leader is going to think about the conversations they're going to have. You're going to consider an email and read it through before you send it out, especially as to do with something that is disciplinary in action. You're going to be careful with your words, because you understand that words have power. They can either help us grow as individuals, or they can tear us down. So a moral leader is going to consider all those things. They're not just going to speak out of turn. They're going not just going to speak haphazardly. They're going to consider what needs to be said, and they're going to act in a way that honors the organization and doesn't compromise their values. Now, I want you to take the time to look through these scenarios. Um, Jot down your thoughts and ideas. What would you do? How would you handle it? Now, I want you to press pause on this, and when we come back, we'll get right back into it. All right. All right. So let's look at Do Young first. Do Young should have not let technical skills be the only deciding factor, but also consider the long-term potential of the applicants. Technical skill can be acquired and enhanced over time. Right, it's very important as a moral leader, especially when you're interviewing candidates to come upon your team. Don't just look at their technical skill. Listen, here's just a nugget of wisdom. If they got to the interview, they have the technical skill. The question is this a good fit for your team? Are they someone that you can see being a future leader in the organization? Would this be someone that you would want to work for? Are they extremely egotistic, or do they care about individuals? Do they line up with the values and the mission and the vision of the organization? Those things have to be considered. And so that means you have to look beyond. You have to ask yourself, maybe they didn't have all the advantages that someone else had, but they got here. So let me give them an opportunity. When we look at Leo, Leo being himself has potential to create an environment that will inspire others around him to be their true selves as well. Remember, representation matters. If Leo can be himself, he's going to inspire others to come along and join a part of the organization, because they see that they can be their authentic selves without compromising who they are. Brooklyn has the obligation to help her team understand how dressing up as American Indians is considered offensive. Right, so this is, and this goes kind of back to with Leo. We want people to be their authentic selves, but we don't want to mock whether we know it or not, mockingly try to represent someone else's culture. When we let people be their authentic selves, it creates a safe place for them. But when we mock someone else's culture, whether it's unintentionally or intentionally, it could be very offensive. And this is where we need leaders, moral leaders, to say, no, let's take a pause on that. Does this really honor that culture? In other words, don't just, don't start having certain foods saying we're honoring a culture. No, if you're really going to honor that culture, learn how to properly make that food for the organization. If you're really going to honor the culture and you're going to honor something as Women's History Month, then really do a deep dive into women's history. Understand the plight, understand the struggle, how it was overcome. Understand these things. If you're going to celebrate American Indians, then truly understand that these are tribes. These and they have lived here. Understand how to honor them. Do your research. Do something that honors the person in the culture, not something that makes you feel good that you put out on stage or you wrote a story about. Do something that is honorable to that culture. Amber can take the opportunity to compassionately help her team understand how medical procedures such as vasectomies do not align with the ethical and religious directives of Catholic Healthcare Ministries. Right now, that's hard, but you have to be able to take that time and have those crucial and difficult conversations and provide the resources so people can know what the organization promotes. What is the mission? What are the values? You have to be willing to do the research and figure that out. Sierra can take the opportunity to compassionately help her team understand how partnering with healthcare organizations that do not align with the ethical and religious directives of Catholic Healthcare Ministries is something we cannot do. Right? Once again, it's knowing and having those resources and taking the time compassionately, I may add, speaking the truth in love, showing people this is why we can't do it. This is why we don't do it. Right? Remember, you're promoting the values. We're not asking you to compromise who you are. We're asking you to promote the values of the organization and who they are. Michelle can show her team how VUBs can help the team meet uh, key performance indicators and reduce waste through Lean Sigma 6. Right? It's about taking that opportunity to go over and walk with your team and to be with your team and to have the integrity, like, hey, my team needs to know this information. I'm going to provide it, develop this skill set so they can be a benefit to themselves, for their careers, and to the organization. Now let's look at some next steps. One, Step one is look for education and resources that can equip and enhance your team's skill set that will benefit the organization and betterment of your team. Step two, allow your team huddles to be a meaningful place where your team can express their ideas freely and let them aid you in creating a work environment where they can express themselves openly. Three, don't assume your team is aware of all the policies and procedures. Spend time going over policy and where to access it. Also, do not be afraid to discuss with your leader policies that seem to go against the mission and vision. Step four, be an advocate for your team and stay engaged to understand your team's dynamic, the issues and concerns. The more in tune you are with your team, the better advocate you will be. And step five, your team is unique in all aspects. Appreciate the gift of a diverse team by leading and serving them well. Right? So listen, you can go ahead and pause this right here and jot these down and keep them with you and feel free to share. Right? These are 5 steps that we would encourage you to use and to do as you go on. All right, hey, listen, thank you so much for taking the time to go through these modules. I know it seems like a lot, but hey, listen, you're a superstar. You can do this. If there's anybody can do it, it's you. So listen, you go ahead and go to module 3, and then we'll get started. All right, talk to you later. Bye-bye.